Deep in the heart of the Himalayas, where the air grows thin and the shadows stretch long, there's a tale whispered among Tibetan elders, one so terrifying, it's passed down only in hushed tones. It speaks of a hidden door, a gateway not of this world, sealed away for centuries by ancient rituals and forbidden mantras. They call it a hell portal, a crack between realms where unspeakable things wait, clawing at the edges of our reality. According to legend, one careless monk, driven by curiosity or pride, once dared to open such a portal. What followed was a nightmare beyond comprehension, entities with twisted forms and voices that echoed like screams, spilling into our world before the door could be shut again. The village near that cursed site wiped from history as if it had never existed. This isn't just some campfire story. Tibetan lore is filled with warnings about these portals, scattered like dark jewels across sacred texts and oral traditions. They're said to be hidden in remote caves, buried beneath forgotten temples, or even disguised as unassuming cracks in the earth. But why would anyone risk opening them? Some sought power, others knowledge, but the price was always the same. The moment the seal breaks, the stories say, the fabric of reality weakens, and what crawls through isn't just death, it's something far worse. A corruption that twists the land, the mind, even time itself. Monks who have encountered these forces speak of visions so horrifying, they gouged out their own eyes to escape them. So why, after centuries of dire warnings, does the idea of these portals still haunt us? Maybe it's because they tap into something primal, the fear of what lies beyond our understanding, the dread of forbidden knowledge. Or maybe it's because in a world where we've mapped every inch of the globe, the thought that there are still doors we're not meant to open sends a shiver down the spine. Today, we're diving into the heart of this mystery, unraveling why Tibetan tradition insists these portals must stay sealed, and what ancient texts claim lurks on the other side. Because some doors were never meant to be unlocked. According to Tibetan tradition, a hell portal isn't just a physical door, it's a rupture in the very fabric of existence, a place where the boundaries between our world and the Naraka, the Buddhist hell realms, grow dangerously thin. Ancient texts describe these portals as wounds in reality, often marked by unnatural phenomena. Rocks that bleed, shadows that move against the wind, or whispers in languages no living human has ever spoken. They're said to form in places where immense suffering or blasphemous acts have occurred, as if the land itself remembers the trauma and becomes a weak point between dimensions. The concept ties deeply into the Buddhist understanding of Naraka, a complex system of hells not unlike Dante's circles, but with a crucial difference. These realms aren't just places of punishment, they're reflections of the mind's darkest states. Greed, hatred, and delusion don't just lead to Naraka, they create it. And hell portals, in a sense, are where that psychic weight becomes tangible. Some scriptures compare them to cracks in a dam, where the pressure of accumulated karma threatens to burst through. Yet there's a chilling duality in how these portals are portrayed. On one hand, they're literal gateways described in medieval Tibetan grimoires as physical openings, often sealed with iron doors inscribed with mantras or bound by chains forged from meteorite metal. One account tells of a cave in the Tsangpo Gorge where such a door was found, its surface ice cold to the touch even in midsummer, with echoes of wailing voices seeping through the cracks. On the other hand, they serve as potent metaphors. In esoteric practices, hell portals symbolize the moment when meditation or rituals go horribly wrong, when a practitioner's arrogance or broken vows rips open a path for malevolent forces. The Bardo Thodol, the famous Tibetan Book of the Dead, even warns that in the afterlife, the unprepared mind can hallucinate these portals into existence, trapping itself in self-made torment. What makes these accounts so unsettling is how they blur the line between the symbolic and the terrifyingly real. Take the legend of the Black Stupa of Kathmandu, for example. a site where a 9th century tantric master supposedly imprisoned a Helmuth beneath a mound of charcoal and iron shavings. To this day, locals claim the ground there occasionally trembles without cause, and those who dig too deep reportedly vanish without a trace. Whether literal or psychological, the message is clear: some thresholds once crossed don't allow return. The wrathful deities of Tibetan Buddhism aren't just fearsome to behold, they're the cosmic bouncers standing between our world and the chaos lurking behind hell's door. At the forefront is Mahakala, the Great Black One, a deity whose very name sends shivers through the uninitiated. With his necklace of skulls and flaming sword, he's not some mindless destroyer but a meticulous guardian. Scriptures describe him patrolling the edges of these portals, his 6 arms each holding a weapon or tool to sever ignorance, greed, and the other toxic energies that might tempt a human to tamper with the forbidden. His snarling face isn't just for show, it's a mirror reflecting back the grotesque consequences of unsealing what should stay sealed. But Mahakala isn't alone in this vigil. Alongside him stand the Dharmapalas, the protectors of the teachings, a pantheon of enlightened beings who chose wrathful forms specifically to counter the horrors that might slip through these ruptures. Take Palden Lamo, the fierce Dakini who rides across a sea of blood on a mule, skinned alive. Her imagery isn't nightmare fuel for its own sake. That mule, according to legend, it was her own son, transformed as punishment for his cruelty. Now she patrols the threshold realms, ensuring no one repeats her mistakes by underestimating the cost of forbidden knowledge. Her bowl isn't just for catching blood, it's said to trap the souls of those foolish enough to chant the wrong mantras near an unstable portal. Then there's Yamantaka, the conqueror of death itself, who appears as a buffalo-headed titan trampling on gods and demons alike. His role is especially chilling, not just to guard but to dismantle. When a portal's seals begin to weaken, Yamantaka's rituals are performed, not to close the door but to annihilate the very concept of the doorway. Texts describe his ceremonies as spiritual demolition, where every brick of the portal's metaphysical architecture is systematically unraveled until nothing remains, not even the memory of its location. What's fascinating is how these protectors blur the line between myth and manual. The Kangya, Tibet's sacred canon, includes shockingly precise instructions for identifying guardian activity. A sudden drop in temperature near a cave entrance, statues weeping black resin, or the scent of burning hair with no source, these are considered signs the Dharmapalas have reinforced their watch. There's even accounts of monks encountering what they call shadow lamas, figures who appear human until you notice their feet don't touch the ground, who vanish after warning trespassers away from certain sites. But perhaps the most unsettling detail lies in the guardians' duality. They don't just punish, they test. Ancient scrolls tell of Mahakala appearing to meditators as a starving beggar or a wounded animal near suspected portals. Those who show compassion are secretly given protection against the portal's influence, while those who turn away, they're already doomed, their indifference proof they'd risk unleashing hell for personal gain. It's a brutal lesson. The only people who should ever approach these thresholds are those who wouldn't dare open them. The Bardo Thodol, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, doesn't just describe the afterlife, it serves as a stark manual for navigating the hidden dangers of hell portals, framed as both physical and metaphysical threats. One passage warns of the chasms of Naraka that yawn beneath the feet of the unwise, describing how certain misguided souls, obsessed with uncovering forbidden truths, inadvertently tear the veil with their grasping hands. These ruptures, the text claims, don't merely lead to punishment, they amplify it, dragging entire communities into shared damnation. The consequences are chillingly specific. Villages near an open portal might witness crops withering overnight despite fertile soil, or children speaking in tongues no scholar can decipher, their voices shifting into guttural growls by midnight. Another scripture, the Gahyagarbha Tantra, goes further, detailing the 7 signs of a leaking portal, a phenomena so precise they read like an apocalyptic checklist. The first sign, animals refusing to approach a particular site, even predators like wolves or snow leopards circling it in silence, the last and most dire. Shadows that don't match their light source, twisting into elongated, clawed silhouettes when no one is watching. This tantra recounts a harrowing tale of a monk who ignored these omens, convinced his purified mind could withstand whatever lay beyond. The text spares no detail. His body was later found fused to a cavern wall, his skin stitched with black veins as if the mountain had claimed him from within. Yet perhaps the most unsettling account comes from the terma hidden texts believed revealed by enlightened beings. One passage describes a hell portal not as a fixed location but as a contagion. A 15th century scroll recounts how a single opened gateway in a remote valley caused neighboring monasteries to experience shared hallucinations. Monks miles apart reported identical nightmares of a door with no frame, pulsing like a wound. The scroll's solution wasn't exorcism but eradication. The site was scorched with sacred fire, then buried under tons of iron-rich rock to starve the doorway of breath. What unites these texts isn't just their vivid imagery, but their psychological insight. The Bardo Thodol clarifies that hell portals prey on human weakness, particularly the belief that enlightenment can be seized through force. One passage cautions, the arrogant practitioner mistakes the abyss for a shortcut, not realizing the fall lasts lifetimes. It's a warning echoed across centuries. Curiosity untempered by humility doesn't unlock wisdom. It becomes the key that turns in the wrong direction, opening something far older and far hungrier than we can comprehend. History remembers the doomed expedition of Lama Tsultrim Dorje, a 17th century monk whose name now serves as a cautionary whisper in Tibetan monasteries. According to brittle parchment scrolls preserved in Lhasa, Dorje became obsessed with a fissure high in the Ungari Mountains, a crack in the rock that emitted a low, rhythmic hum like distant chanting in reverse. Local herders had long avoided the site, claiming their yaks would panic and bolt if driven too close. But Dorje, convinced the opening led to a hidden realm of enlightened beings, gathered 12 disciples and performed the forbidden Troma Nagmo ritual at the fissure's edge. The surviving account, scribbled by a shepherd who witnessed the event from a nearby ridge, describes how the chanting monks' shadows began twisting unnaturally, elongating up the cliff face as if something were pulling them from within the mountain. Then came the sound, not a collapse but an unfolding like stone petals peeling back. The shepherd fled, but not before seeing black water pour from the fissure, a substance that moved against the slope's incline, swallowing the monk's screams as it rose. Centuries later, British explorer Francis Younghusband's controversial 1904 mission to Tibet stumbled upon an eerily similar account. His journals mention a village near Mount Kailash where elders spoke of a hungry cave, sealed with iron plates etched in archaic script. The locals claimed that 50 years prior, a renegade lama had removed one plate, seeking power over death. That night, every dog in the village howled in unison before falling silent. By dawn, the lama was found curled around the plate, his ribcage inverted, like a flower bloomed inward. Younghusband's team dismissed it as superstition until their Tibetan guide vanished near that same cave, his footprints ending abruptly in fresh snow as if he'd been plucked into the sky. Perhaps the most chilling case comes from the Tibetan demon census, a 19th century registry of supernatural disturbances. Entry 117 documents a mass hysteria in a Pamoko valley, where villagers reported seeing the sky crack above an ancient stupa. Those who gazed too long at the rift claimed to hear their own voices calling back to them, but seconds out of sync, creating a nightmarish echo. Then came the disappearances, first livestock, then children, vanishing from locked rooms with only a faint smell of sulfur left behind. The census notes that the region's lamas ultimately performed the Vajrakilaya rite, a ceremony so potent it required hammering iron daggers into the earth to stitch the world shut. The final line is stark. 3 priests died holding the daggers, their hands fused to the hilts by heat no fire could produce. What unites these accounts isn't just the horror, but the recurring motifs: unnatural shadows, inverted anatomy, sounds that defy physics. Modern anthropologists suggest these details encode real dangers, perhaps radioactive mineral deposits or toxic gases in high-altitude caves, but the old texts insist the patterns mean something deeper. When reality fractures, they warn, it does so in predictable ways because what waits on the other side knows exactly how to unravel us. In Tibetan Buddhism, karma isn't just cause and effect, it's the invisible thread weaving through every action, every intention, binding us to consequences far beyond this lifetime. And when it comes to hell portals, the karmic stakes couldn't be higher. Think of it like this: every time someone tampers with these thresholds, they're not just risking their own fate, they're tugging at a web of interconnected destinies. The Lamrim Chenmo, a foundational text, compares opening a hell portal to throwing a boulder into a still pond. The ripples don't stop at the perpetrator, they cascade outward, dragging innocent souls into the undertow. This isn't some abstract spiritual metaphor. Tibetan lore is filled with cautionary tales where entire lineages suffered for one person's arrogance. Take the story of the merchant from Shigatse, who ignored warnings and pried open a fissure in a ruined temple, convinced it hid treasure. The texts say he didn't die screaming, he lived for decades after, but his body wasted away no matter how much he ate, as if something unseen were consuming him bite by bite. Worse, his descendants were said to be plagued by nightmares of a door no one could close, their family line cursed until a lama performed a ritual to return the debt to its source. But here's where karma gets even more intricate. It's not just about the act of opening the portal, it's about the why. The Bodhikariyavatara teaches that intention amplifies karma like fuel poured on a fire. A desperate person seeking to save a dying village might face lighter consequences than a scholar chasing forbidden knowledge out of pride. There's a chilling account in the Tibetan Book of Remedies about a 15th century physician who tried to use hell portal energies to heal a plague. The disease vanished overnight, but the villagers began aging backward, children growing wrinkled while elders regressed into babbling infants. The physician's karma. He wasn't reborn in Naraka, he became part of the portal itself, his consciousness trapped in the threshold, eternally stitching the wound he'd torn. Modern scholars point out how brilliantly this reflects Buddhist psychology. Hell portals symbolize the ultimate karmic feedback loop. The more someone seeks power over the unnatural, the more they're controlled by it. The Abhidharma texts describe karma as a mirror. What you project outward is what you eventually confront. So when a person unleashes hellish forces, they're not just breaking a cosmic rule, they're meeting the darkest echoes of their own mind, and that's the ultimate warning. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that realms aren't just places, they're states of being. Opening a hell portal isn't stumbling into some pre-existing dungeon. It's manifesting your capacity for suffering, crystallizing your inner chaos into a doorway. The ancient lamas didn't just fear these ruptures because of what might crawl out, they feared what the act of opening revealed about the human heart. Because if karma is a mirror, then no one unseals hell without first carrying a piece of it inside themselves. The idea of forbidden gateways to realms of torment isn't unique to Tibet. It's a thread woven through the tapestry of world mythology, each culture stitching its own terrifying version. Take the Greeks, who spoke of the underworld's gates guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound whose very bark could freeze souls in place. But where Tibetan portals are ruptures in reality itself, Greek mythology treats them as fixed locations, rivers to cross, gates to pass with clear rules. Drink from the wrong waters of the Lethe and you'll forget your past, pay Charon's coin and you'll earn passage. The difference is striking. Greek afterworld entrances are transactional, almost bureaucratic, while Tibetan hell portals are wounds in existence, oozing chaos rather than order. Then there's Norse Helheim, a realm of icy mist where the goddess Hel reigns over those who didn't die in battle. The path there, the Helveg, is described as a downward slope so gradual you might not realize you've crossed over until it's too late. Unlike the abrupt horror of a Tibetan portal bursting open, Helheim's danger is insidious, a slow chilling of the bones, a fading of light. Yet both traditions share a chilling detail, the idea that these thresholds aren't just physical. In the prose Edda, Odin whispers that Hell's gates can appear anywhere to those already half lost to despair, much like how Tibetan texts warn that portals manifest near minds twisted by greed or hatred. Japan's Jugoku, with its boiling blood rivers and sword-leafed forests, offers another fascinating parallel. Buddhist influences shaped its imagery, yet unlike the Tibetan Naraka's fluid boundaries, Jugoku's 8 hells are meticulously mapped, each with a specific torment for specific sins. What unites them is the concept of kegare, spiritual pollution. In both traditions, hell isn't just punishment, it's contagion. A Japanese folktale tells of a cracked stone near Kyoto that leaked screams until purified, echoing Tibetan accounts of portals spewing black mist that infects the land. But what sets the Tibetan interpretation apart is its psychological depth. Where other mythologies focus on external torments, flames, ice, monsters, Tibetan lore insists the true horror is internal. A hell portal doesn't just lead to damnation, it's created by it. The Bardo Thodol describes how a single mind steeped in malice can unwittingly thin the veil, turning a quiet cave into a screaming vortex. Compare this to Dante's Inferno, where damned souls are frozen in predetermined rings, static in their suffering. Tibetan hells are alive, shifting, because they're woven from the very karma that fuels them. Even Mesoamerican beliefs mirror this duality. The Aztec Mictlan had 9 layers, but reaching them required navigating trials tailored to the deceased's life. Yet unlike Tibet's guardians, wrathful but enlightened Mictlan's lords were indifferent. Tibetan protectors actively intervene, not just to bar entry, but to test would-be trespassers' motives. This reflects a core difference. In most mythologies, hell is inevitable for the wicked. In Tibet, it's avoidable until someone chooses through action or arrogance to rip the fabric. Perhaps the most chilling parallel comes from Celtic lore, where Shia mounds were said to be portals to the otherworld. But where Celtic tales warn of time distortion, mortals returning to find centuries past Tibetan accounts describe something worse. Travelers returning unchanged, only for their families to realize too late that something else came back wearing their skin. It's this focus on corruption, on hell's power to seep into our world, that makes the Tibetan version uniquely terrifying. Other cultures built gates. Tibetans warned of cracks and how easily they spread. In the secretive world of Tibetan esoteric practices, few rituals walk the razor's edge between revelation and ruin as dramatically as Churd, the cutting-through ceremony. Picture this: a lone practitioner, often in a moonlit charnel ground, using a ritual drum made from human skull caps and a thigh-bone trumpet to summon spirits. But here's the catch: they're not there to open doors. They're there to dance along the threshold, offering their own body as a feast to hungry ghosts, not as an invitation but as a distraction. The Chödpa's mantra isn't a key, it's a barricade, a way to satisfy restless entities just enough to keep them from seeking larger cracks into our world. Texts like the Machic Labdron's complete works stress that the moment a practitioner shifts from offering to negotiating, the ritual becomes a catastrophic risk. One 14th century account tells of a monk who, in a misguided attempt to heal a vengeful spirit, altered the traditional offering chant. By dawn, his companions found him convulsing on the ground, his mouth sewn shut with invisible threads, the air reeking of burnt copper. Tantric practices, too, tread this perilous line. Take the Vajrakalaya rituals, where initiates visualize themselves as wrathful deities piercing through illusions with ritual daggers. The Ungakpa tantric manuals are adamant. These daggers must never be directed at actual physical gateways, only at mental obscurations. There's a harrowing tale from the Terma of Padmasambhava about a 16th century yogi who, in a state of spiritual arrogance, used the Vajrakalaya's power to cleanse a cave rumored to be a weak spot between worlds. The cave didn't purify, it awakened. Witnesses described a sound like 1,000 bones snapping in reverse, and the yogi emerged with his left hand aged 100 years, his right hand shriveled like a child. The message was clear: some boundaries exist not to be crossed but to remind us of the cost of overreach. What makes these practices so fascinating and terrifying is their recognition of a fundamental truth. The difference between exploration and transgression isn't just about technique but humility. The Gahyasamaja Tantra compares it to drinking poison from a ritual cup. Sip with reverence and it becomes medicine, guzzle it like water and it burns through your soul. There's a reason advanced practitioners spend decades mastering foundational meditations before even approaching these rituals. A 20th century Lama once described hell portals as karmic whirlpools. The closer you get, the harder they pull. And the only anchor is unwavering discipline. Modern practitioners still whisper about the silent retreat incident in 1983, when a group of Western students attempted a truncated version of Churd in Nepal without proper guidance. They'd studied the texts but missed the unwritten rules, the way seasoned lamas always position their ritual knives away from the north, the direction associated with Naraka's pull. By the third night, their interpreter fled, claiming the students' shadows had developed extra limbs. The survivors, though survivors might be too generous too, were institutionalized, reported visions of a door that only appeared when they closed their eyes, a door they couldn't unsee. This is the fine line Tibetan traditions guard so fiercely: exploration essential, transgression unforgivable. Because in these practices, the greatest danger isn't the monsters you might meet, it's the part of yourself that starts to recognize them. As one old tantric master put it, hell doesn't seduce you with a roar, it whispers in your own voice, convincing you that this time you're the exception. Rumors of hell portals don't just linger in ancient texts, they pulse through modern Tibet like a whispered undercurrent. In 2007, a Nepalese trekking guide named Dorje Tamang vanished near the sacred lake Manasarovar after photographing a fissure that hadn't been there the day before. His last image, recovered from a waterlogged camera, showed a jagged crevice veined with what looked like frozen black mist. Locals insisted the site was one of the breathing caves, places where the ground periodically opens and closes like a lung. But the chilling detail: Dorje's footprints led directly into the crack, then vanished halfway as if he'd been yanked forward by an invisible force. Then there's the infamous singing stupa incident of 1999. Pilgrims at the Jayantsi monastery reported hearing eerie melodies emanating from a 9th century stupa. Not the usual mantras, but a dissonant choir of voices singing in reverse. When monks investigated, they found the stupa's inner chamber coated in a slimy residue that evaporated within hours. The Dalai Lama's office later issued a rare public statement calling it a natural acoustic phenomenon, but older lamas knew better. The Kagyu specifically mentions reverse speech as a sign of threshold agitation, where a dormant portal begins resonating with Naraka's frequencies. Western researchers have stumbled into these mysteries too. In 2015, geologist Dr. Emma Carter led a team studying seismic activity in the Bhutanese Himalayas. Her instruments detected a bizarre anomaly, a cavern system emitting ultra-low frequency vibrations that matched no known geological process. Local herders refused to approach the area, claiming their livestock would panic at the wrong shadows. Carter's journal, later leaked online, described finding a smooth, almost manufactured-looking archway deep in the cavern, its surface etched with symbols she couldn't place. The most unsettling entry: the rock isn't cold, it's void of temperature, like touching the space between stars. The team abandoned the site after two members developed identical nightmares of being unwoven thread by thread. What makes these modern accounts so compelling isn't just their strangeness, it's how they echo ancient warnings. Take the 2019 case of a Tibetan miner who allegedly broke into a hollow space beneath Mount Kailash. His co-workers reported seeing him emerge clutching a handful of black sand that moved against gravity, trickling upward between his fingers. Within days, he began speaking in a language linguists identified as Proto-Tibetan, a tongue dead for 3,000 years. When lamas performed a cleansing ritual, the sand burst into blue flames that left no ash, the miner's final words before vanishing from a locked hospital room. It wasn't a door, it was a mouth. Critics dismiss these stories as folklore fueled by altitude sickness or methane leaks, but the consistency is hard to ignore. From trekkers to monks to scientists, the details align with texts written centuries apart. Unnatural shadows, impossible sounds, substances that defy physics. Even the skepticism follows an old pattern. The Bardo Thodol warns that hell portals actively cloak themselves in doubt, making witnesses question their own sanity. Perhaps that's the most terrifying part. If these thresholds exist, they're not just hidden in remote caves. They're hiding in plain sight, wearing the perfect disguise, our own reluctance to believe. Beneath the surface of these terrifying legends lies a deeper, more unsettling truth. Hell portals aren't just physical threats. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's darkest psychological landscapes. In Tibetan culture, where the line between the external and internal worlds is famously porous, these stories might reveal as much about the human mind as they do about supernatural realms. Think of them as cultural pressure valves, giving form to fears too overwhelming to name: death, madness, the collapse of moral order. When elders warn of portals opening where the greedy and cruel tread, they're not just describing damnation, they're encoding a warning about what happens when society's taboos crack under the weight of unchecked desire. From a Jungian lens, these myths take on even richer meaning. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of instincts and archetypes buried deep in all human psyches, finds eerie resonance in Tibetan hell lore. The writhing entities said to claw through open portals, they could symbolize repressed shadow selves, the parts of our nature we deny or bury. The portals themselves might represent moments when those suppressed forces erupt uncontrollably into consciousness. Jung himself studied Eastern texts, noting how Tibetan depictions of Naraka echoed his theories about the underworld of the psyche. One could argue these stories aren't about literal places at all. They're dramatizations of psychological disintegration, where crossing the threshold means surrendering to self-destructive impulses that can't be undone. This interpretation gains weight when examining specific details. Take the recurring motif of inverted anatomy: monks with ribs curled inward, hands aged unevenly. In dream analysis, distorted bodies often represent fractured identities. The black ooze described in so many accounts, Jungian scholars might liken it to the prima materia, the chaotic, unconscious sludge that precedes transformation. Even the guardians make symbolic sense. Wrathful deities like Mahakala embody the psyche's self-protective rage against its own dissolution. Yet Tibetan tradition offers something Jung's theories don't: a roadmap for navigating these horrors. Where Western psychology might medicate or suppress such visions, Tibetan Buddhism prescribes confrontation. Churd rituals where practitioners visualize offering their flesh to demons, parallel modern exposure therapy, facing fears until they lose their power. The difference: Tibetans treat these forces as real entities rather than mere projections, but the goal is startlingly similar: integration over avoidance. Perhaps that's the most profound lesson hidden in these tales. Hell portals don't just punish, they teach. By externalizing our deepest fears into tangible myths, they give us a language to grapple with the incomprehensible. When a culture warns that arrogance opens doors, it's not just speaking of magic, it's acknowledging the human tendency to court disaster through hubris. The next time you hear a whisper about a cursed cave or a shadow that moves wrong, ask yourself, is this a ghost story or a 1,000-year-old cautionary tale about the monsters we risk becoming when we ignore the warnings etched in our own minds? Tibetan law doesn't just see hell portals as supernatural hazards, they are violations of an unseen ecological order, ruptures in a delicate balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. Picture the Himalayas not just as peaks of rock and ice, but as living entities, their slopes threaded with invisible energies as intricate as root systems. Sacred mountains like Mount Kailash aren't merely revered, they're considered cosmic anchors, their foundations believed to stabilize the boundary between realms. Disturbing these places isn't just taboo, it's ecological sabotage on a metaphysical scale. Ancient texts describe certain caves and lakes as pressure points, where the weight of human intrusion risks fracturing the subtle membranes that keep darker forces at bay. One 19th-century monastic scroll compares hell portals to wounds in a giant's flesh. Prick the skin and blood flows, pierce the mountain and shadows drink. This belief in sacred geography extends to Tibet's hidden lands or Baal, valleys sealed by enlightened beings as refuges, not just for humans but for the integrity of reality itself. Folklore warns that these places are protected by earth guardians, spirits woven into the landscape like neural networks. When a hell portal opens, it's not just a local disaster, it's a systemic collapse. A 16th-century account from the Pamako region describes how a landslide triggered by greedy miners unearthed a long-buried stone door. Within weeks, the surrounding forests withered from the roots up, rivers ran backward, and children began sleepwalking toward the site, their eyes rolled back as if pulled by an unseen tide. The lamas who sealed the door reportedly didn't just chant mantras, they performed rituals mimicking ecological restoration, replanting the area's spiritual energy with consecrated seeds and water blessed to mimic glacial runoff. The parallel to modern environmental crises is uncanny. Just as overfishing disrupts marine food chains or deforestation unleashes dormant pathogens, Tibetan cosmology suggests that tampering with spiritual ecosystems releases ancient, destabilizing forces. The Bardo Thodol even frames hell portals as karmic feedback loops. Harm inflicted on the land rebounds as supernatural catastrophe. Take Lake Namtso, where locals refuse to fish or bathe, believing its waters are the tears of a goddess. When Chinese soldiers dynamited part of its shoreline in the 1960s, herders reported visions of serpentine shapes coiling beneath the ice, a phenomenon later documented by a French anthropologist who noted swirling black masses with no apparent cause moving against wind and current. What makes this ecological metaphor so potent is its universality. Whether you view these forces as literal or symbolic, the underlying message resonates. Some boundaries exist to protect us, not just the unseen. The Lama's warnings echo modern ecology's precautionary principle that disrupting systems we don't fully understand courts disaster. After all, if a sacred mountain is the lid on a cosmic pressure cooker, wouldn't you think twice before prying it open? The air grows thick with the scent of rusted iron where no metal lies. This is one of the first warnings. Tibetan folklore describes hell portals as wounds in reality, and like any injury, they bleed signs before they rupture fully. Elders speak of sudden, localized cold spots so intense they leave frost on summer grass, a chill that clings to the skin long after you've stepped away. These aren't natural temperature shifts. The Kagyu texts specify that true portal chills defy climate, appearing as perfect circles where breath freezes midair while just steps away the air swelters. Then come the sounds, not echoes but inversions. A herder might hear his own voice calling from an empty gorge a half second before he actually speaks. Monastic records tell of caves where dripping water hits the ground, then the drip is heard again, rising backward into the ceiling. The most sinister accounts describe shadow speech, whispers that don't match the movement of any visible lips, often chanting fragments of the Bardo Thodol's Hell Realms chapter backward. Visual omens follow, warping the land itself. Trees near active portals allegedly grow in spirals, their bark striated with patterns resembling clenched teeth. Rocks split open to reveal veins of black glass that pulse faintly at dusk, as if something beneath is breathing. Pilgrims' journals mention wrong reflections in still waters, a face peering back with too many eyes, or a figure standing behind the viewer when no one's there. The Terma texts warn that these illusions aren't mere tricks, they're glimpses through the thinning veil, proof that the barrier is fraying. But perhaps the most disturbing sign is the behavior of animals. Yaks refuse to cross certain invisible lines, their hides foaming with sweat despite the cold. Birds circle portals in silent, rigid formation, a phenomenon locals call the sky stitching itself shut. Snow leopards, normally elusive, have been observed dragging prey away from these sites, as if offering tribute to keep something fed and dormant. The ultimate confirmation, according to the Gahagarbha Tantra, is the threefold dissonance, when a place exhibits thermal, auditory, and visual anomalies simultaneously. That's when the lamas know the door isn't just rattling, it's about to swing open. When disaster lurks in the unseen cracks of the world, Tibetan tradition doesn't leave its people defenseless. The rituals and objects designed to ward off hell portals form an intricate armor of sound, symbol, and sacred geometry. At the heart of these defenses are mantras not just recited but woven into the environment. The most potent is the 6-syllable Om Mani Padme Hum, each syllable believed to vibrate at a frequency that reinforces reality's fabric. Lamas teach that chanting it near unstable sites acts like spiritual cork, filling microscopic fissures before they can widen. There's a reason you'll hear it endlessly looping in remote valleys. Recordings from 1982 captured a group of monks chanting it non-stop for 72 hours near a fissure in the Dolpo region, their voices allegedly slowing the growth of black veins creeping up nearby rocks. Then there are prayer flags, those colorful rectangles fluttering on Himalayan ridges. Most outsiders see them as decorations, but their placement is precise warfare against unseen threats. The wind that moves them doesn't just carry prayers, it disperses protection. Each flag's mantra isn't printed, it's block printed with ink mixed with consecrated herbs and metals, turning the very air into a cleansing current. The Kangya describes how properly positioned flags create an invisible fence, their vibrations forming a grid that repels portal energies. There's an account from a 1920s British mountaineer who watched lamas plant flags in a perfect pentagon around a murmuring cave. By dawn, the whispers had dulled to barely audible sighs. But perhaps the most personal defenses are the talismans, objects charged with such concentrated power. They're treated like spiritual circuit breakers. The Gao, small lockets worn around the neck, often contain miniature scrolls inscribed with the Vajra armor mantra, a barrage of syllables so potent, copies are never destroyed, only buried in sanctified ground. Then there are the Ferber daggers, their three-sided blades representing the severing of past, present, and future karmic ties. One 19th century Terma text recounts how a lama thrust a Ferber into a blood-warm patch of earth, the metal growing icy as it pinned an emerging portal shut. Modern metallurgists who examined similar daggers found their alloys contain meteoric iron, a material Tibetans call namchak or sky iron, believed to carry celestial purity. The rituals themselves are precise to the point of obsession. A sang smoke offering isn't just burning juniper, it's a biochemical defense. The specific resins used produce fumes that Tibetan texts claim blind lower realms entities to our world. There's a chilling consistency in accounts where sang smoke causes unnatural shadows to recoil as if scalded. Even the construction of stupas follows this protective logic. Their layered shapes aren't arbitrary. X-rays of ancient stupas reveal hidden chambers filled with iron-rich sand, magnetite powders, and herb bundles exactly where esoteric diagrams mark pressure points in the cosmic architecture. What unites these methods is their recognition of portals as both spiritual and energetic phenomena. The mantras aren't pleas, they're sonic scalpels. The metals in talismans aren't decorative, they're conductors. When a lama ties a red string around a child's wrist, that thread has been charged with thousands of recitations, each syllable spinning an invisible shield. There's a reason these practices have endured. They're not superstitions. They're the accumulated wisdom of centuries spent studying what happens when the walls between worlds grow thin and how to thicken them again before it's too late. The moment a hell portal tears open, the land doesn't just suffer, it screams. Tibetan accounts describe villages gripped by plagues that defy medicine, where victims don't just die but unravel. One 18th century scroll from a Gelug monastery details an outbreak near Mount Nyanchen Tanglha, where those infected began shedding teeth and hair within hours, their skin splitting like overripe fruit to reveal muscle tissue interlaced with black filaments, threads that pulsed independently of their heartbeat. Survivors claimed the sickness didn't spread by touch or breath, but by thought. Merely fearing infection made you vulnerable. By the time lamas sealed the ruptured cave blamed for the outbreak, 7 settlements had been reduced to silent valleys of twitching corpses, their mouths frozen in identical rictus grins. Demonic infestations follow a different horror. The Tibetan demon census documents a case where a breached portal near the Bhutanese border unleashed entities that didn't possess people, they edited them. Farmers awoke to find family members with rearranged faces, eyes and lips sewn into new configurations by invisible hands. One boy's shadow allegedly detached and scuttled into the forest, returning nights later to crouch at the foot of his bed, whispering recipes for dishes no human had ever eaten. The lamas who cleansed the area reported an even grimmer discovery: patches of ground where the soil had turned to a substance resembling chewed meat, throbbing faintly as if something beneath were digesting. But perhaps most insidious are the distortions of time and space. Near an open portal in the Tsangpo Gorge in the 19th century, an entire valley slipped out of sync with reality. Shepherds watched their sheep age decades in minutes, wool graying and bones collapsing into dust mid-graze. A child who wandered too close to the epicenter returned speaking fluent Sanskrit, a language he'd never learned before his body folded inward like origami. The Bardo Thodol describes such events as reality wounds, where the normal rules of cause and effect dissolve. One monk's journal recounts a doomed attempt to rescue a fellow cleric trapped near an active rupture. The would-be rescuer took 3 steps forward, only to find himself walking backward uncontrollably, his legs moving against his will as if time itself had knotted around him. The cruelest consequence, though, isn't physical, it's the lingering taint. Lands near sealed portals are said to remember. Crops grow twisted, bearing fruit filled with teeth or seeds that scream when boiled. Water sources take on reflective properties that show not the drinker's face, but glimpses of emaciated figures just over their shoulder. Even the dead don't rest peacefully. Graves near old rupture sites are often found empty, the soil above them disturbingly smooth, as if the bodies climbed out and then carefully erased their own tracks. What makes these accounts so harrowing is their consistency across centuries. Whether recorded on parchment or in modern trekker diaries, the patterns repeat: biological impossibilities, gravity-defying substances, time that flows like syrup or shatters like glass. The lamas say this isn't coincidence, it's evidence of Naraka's architecture. The hell realms don't operate by our logic. They follow the rules of nightmare physics, where consequence precedes cause and suffering manifests as weather. To open a portal isn't just to invite monsters, it's to unleash a new set of natural laws, ones where the very air can turn against you. high in the arid cliffs of Nepal's Mustang region, hidden behind a wall of carved prayers and rusted iron chains, lies a cave so forbidden even the wind seems to avoid it. Locals call it Dunga Siechhayo, the Stone Gate, and the stories surrounding it are enough to make seasoned climbers turn back. According to village elders, the cave isn't just a geological formation, it's a prison. Centuries ago, a rogue tantric practitioner allegedly tried to harness the energies of the Naraka realms, drilling into the cave's deepest chamber with ritual daggers until the ground answered. Those who have dared to approach claim the chains sealing the entrance occasionally rattle without wind, accompanied by a sound like distant chewing. What makes the Mustang Cave unique isn't just its legend, it's the lengths gone to keep it shut. Unlike other sealed sites guarded by mantras alone, this one is barricaded with layers of physical and spiritual defenses. The outermost chain links are forged from Namchak, that celestial iron said to neutralize hellish energies. Behind them, slate tablets carved with Bardo Thodol verses are stacked like bricks, each syllable pressed into the rock with ink mixed from crushed lapis lazuli and monk's ashes. But the most chilling detail, the cave's entrance isn't just sealed, it's fed. Once a year during the lunar eclipse, local shamans leave offerings of black salt and charred barley flour at the threshold, not as tribute, but as a distraction, like throwing meat to a guard dog so it won't gnaw through its leash. The taboos here are etched into daily life. Shepherds grazing flocks near the cave mark their animals' ears with red dye, a warning to never retrieve one if it strays too close. Children are taught that the cave's shadow stretches longer at dusk than it should, and that stepping into it means losing your name, your memories, even your reflection. In 2011, a German trekker ignored these warnings and pried up one of the ceiling stones seeking Buddhist relics. He was found 3 days later, crouched in a dry riverbed, insistently scratching the same 7 symbols into the sand until his fingers bled. When locals reburied the stone, they reported feeling warmth radiating from it, as if something beneath were exhaling. Modern researchers have tried and failed to study the site scientifically. In 2019, a National Geographic team brought ground-penetrating radar, only for the device to malfunction, displaying phantom caverns that shifted shape between scans. A llama accompanying them interrupted the expedition, pointing to the radar screen's flickering anomalies. That isn't empty space, that's hunger. The cave's most disturbing quality might be its sentience. Unlike static ruins, Dunga Siechhayo seems to react. When earthquakes strike the region, its chains tighten instead of loosening. During solar storms, nearby compasses spin wildly, as if the cave were pulling at them. Some say it's not a door at all, but a tooth, and the longer it's left undisturbed, the deeper it sinks into the world's flesh. Perhaps that's why the Mustang Cave remains one of the few hell portals still actively guarded. Other sites might crumble into obscurity, but this one demands vigilance. Every rusted link in those chains, every whispered taboo, every offering left in the dead of night, they're not just traditions. They're the stitches holding a wound shut, a reminder that some thresholds aren't meant to be crossed, because what lies behind them doesn't just wait, it learns. If you were to sit down with a Tibetan Lama today and ask about hell portals, their response would likely begin not with a warning, but with a profound question. Why would you seek what harms you? Modern monastic teachings frame these thresholds not as supernatural curiosities, but as spiritual landmines, places where human arrogance collides with cosmic law. A contemporary Jesh might cite the Lamrim Chenmo, which compares unsealing forbidden realms to drinking salt water. The more you consume to quench your thirst, the more it consumes you. The first lesson any Lama would emphasize is Lekki Dreamer, the concept of karmic stains. In Tibetan Buddhism, every action leaves traces like ink on cloth. But disturbing a hell portal isn't just staining yourself, it's plunging the entire cloth into a vat of poison. There are accounts of lamas performing divination rituals near suspected weak spots, using mirrors of polished bronze to detect black light, an inversion of sacred energy said to seep from unstable thresholds. One monk interviewed in Dharamshala described it as seeing your reflection blink back at you, a sign the site remembers every visitor, waiting to latch onto the spiritually unprepared. Central to their warnings would be the difference between exploration and violation. The current Dalai Lama has often spoken about sacred responsibility, the idea that some knowledge exists not to be uncovered but to remind us of our limits. A Sakya master might recount the parable of the Silver River, where a novice monk once diverted a holy spring to prove his mastery, only for the water to turn viscous as blood, carrying the screams of the hell realms upstream. The message: spiritual boundaries aren't arbitrary. They're the guardrails keeping humanity from plunging off cliffs we don't even perceive. Modern lamas also address the psychological dangers, what they call namtak jayap or thought avalanches. Just as unstable snowpack can trigger deadly slides, obsessive curiosity about hell portals creates mental fissures. One Karma Kagyu teacher in Nepal described treating Western meditators who'd fixated on these legends, their dreams invaded by visions of doors that only open inward. The antidote, he stressed, isn't exorcism but reorientation, refocusing the mind on compassion, the one force hell realms cannot mirror. Perhaps most revealing would be a lama's response to the inevitable question, do these portals still open today? Their answer would likely surprise skeptics. Yes, they'd say, but not where you expect, not in caves or ruins, but in human hearts swollen with hatred, in societies that normalize suffering. The true helmets, teachers warn, are the moments when collective cruelty tears reality's seams. As one old hermit near Mount Kailash put it, the worst portals aren't made of stone. They're made of choices. Could there be a scientific lens through which to view these bone-chilling tales? While Tibetan lore speaks of metaphysical ruptures, modern science offers alternative explanations, some equally unsettling in their own right. Take toxic gases, for instance. The Himalayas sit atop seismic hotspots where natural fissures routinely vent carbon dioxide, methane, and even hydrogen sulfide. These odorless killers could easily explain accounts of villagers collapsing near cursed caves or hallucinations of shadowy figures, symptoms mirroring hypoxia. In 1986, Cameroon's Lake Nyos disaster showed how invisible gas clouds can wipe out entire communities without warning, leaving corpses with eerily preserved expressions not unlike those described in Tibetan hell portal accounts. Then there's infrasound, low-frequency noise below human hearing that vibrates at frequencies between 7 and 19 Hz. Studies show these vibrations induce dread, nausea, and even visions of ghostly apparitions by destabilizing the inner ear and visual cortex. Many portal sites are wind-scoured caves or narrow gorges where airflow could generate standing infrasonic waves. Picture a herder hearing his own voice echoed seconds before he speaks, a documented effect of sound reflecting off layered rock at specific angles. Even the infamous shadow speech might find explanation in the brain's attempt to pass garbled acoustics, like how radio static sometimes tricks us into hearing phantom voices. Yet some phenomena resist easy classification. The black mist described in so many accounts, certain volcanic regions emit fog laden with fine metallic particles that cling to surfaces like living tendrils. But no known gas explains the sentient behavior of these mists, like the Nepalese miners' upward trickling sand or the slime that evaporated before monks' eyes. And what of the thermal anomaly circles of cold defying ambient temperature? Quantum physicists point to the Casimir effect, where confined spaces exhibit weird energy fluctuations, but nothing accounts for frost forming in summer heat. Psychological explanations hold weight too. High-altitude psychosis, documented in Everest climbers since the 1950s, mimics portal lore with its time distortions and doppelganger hallucinations. Cultural priming plays a role. If you're raised on stories of hungry caves, your brain might interpret a gas-induced dizzy spell as something far darker. The stone tape theory suggests traumatic events could imprint on environments, replaying under specific conditions like an atmospheric recording. But here's the fascinating twist: Tibetan lamas anticipated these debates. Ancient texts describe clever demons who cloak themselves in natural phenomena, using earthquakes or mist as camouflage. The Gahyagarbha Tantra warns that hell realms adapt to the viewer's expectations. To a scientist, they manifest as inexplicable data, to a monk as wrathful deities. This duality challenges our either-or thinking. Maybe the truth isn't that hell portals are either supernatural or scientific, but that they're both a catastrophic overlap where geology, psychology, and something beyond our current understanding collide. After all, if reality is as layered as Buddhist cosmology suggests, shouldn't its ruptures be equally complex? While Tibetan hell portals remain a sacred and terrifying corner of esoteric lore, modern pop culture hasn't been able to resist weaving them into cinematic spectacles and digital adventures. Take Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where Lara Croft stumbles into a Himalayan cave pulsating with eerie light, its walls etched with symbols that glow like embers. The game leans heavily into the aesthetic, chanting monks, shadowy figures, and a portal that warps reality, but strips away the spiritual stakes. Real Tibetan texts describe these thresholds as wounds in existence, not glowing plot devices waiting to be triggered by a relic. The game's greatest sin isn't its creativity, it's reducing a profound cosmic warning to a puzzle box obstacle. Then there's Doctor Strange, where the Ancient One's sanctum borrows loosely from Tibetan iconography, complete with swirling mandalas that tear open portals to other dimensions. While the film nods to mystical traditions, it trades the karmic gravity of hell realms for Marvel's multiverse rules. In reality, mantras aren't just keys to unlock doorways, they're restraints designed to prevent rupture. The movie's portals are sleek, golden, and consequence-free, worlds apart from the blood-warm fissures and black ooze of legend. Books often fare slightly better. The Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky, though controversial, at least grapples with the philosophical weight of forbidden thresholds, framing them as tests of human arrogance. Meanwhile, horror novels like The Ritual by Adam Neville borrow Tibetan motifs, like the breathing cave concept, but twist them into Norse-inspired terror, blending mythologies until the original warning gets lost in the churn. What's missing from most adaptations? The ethical dimension. Tibetan hell portals aren't just scary, they're karmic tripwires. Video games turn them into boss arenas, films make them flashy transitions, and books often treat them as exotic set dressing. Rarely do they capture the visceral wrongness described in first-hand accounts, the way shadows move against the light, or how time fractures near an opening. The closest might be The Empty Man, a horror film that borrows the concept of a thought contagion from Tibetan lore, where obsession with a portal warps reality itself. Even then, it prioritizes scares over substance. Critics might argue that creative liberties are inevitable, but here's the irony: the real lore is scarier than anything Hollywood conjures. No special effect can match the horror of the Bardo Thodol's warning that some doors, once opened, can't be closed because they were never really doors at all. They're mirrors reflecting back the darkest parts of whoever dared to turn the key. Exploring myths like Tibetan hell portals isn't just about unraveling mysteries, it's about walking a razor-thin line between fascination and exploitation. There's a growing debate in academic and spiritual circles about whether dissecting these sacred warnings for entertainment or curiosity risks stripping them of their cultural and ethical weight. Imagine a centuries-old ritual passed down through generations as a solemn safeguard, repackaged as a plot device in a video game or horror movie. The danger isn't just misrepresentation, it's the erosion of context, turning profound spiritual teachings into exotic set dressing. Tibetan Buddhism isn't a monolith of superstitions waiting to be mined for content. It's a living tradition with deep-rooted protocols. Elders in Himalayan communities have spent lifetimes preserving these stories not as campfire tales, but as vital cautionary wisdom. When outsiders treat hell portals as mere folklore rather than sacred prohibitions, they risk committing what scholars call spiritual colonialism, extracting elements of a culture while ignoring their original significance. Take the case of a well-known podcast that dramatized the Lama Tsultrim Dorje story as a supernatural thriller, complete with eerie sound effects. Tibetan listeners pointed out the glaring omission. The tale's core lesson about the karmic consequences of arrogance was reduced to a jump scare. Yet there's another side to this debate. Some Tibetan scholars argue that responsible storytelling can act as a bridge, introducing global audiences to these traditions with the reverence they deserve. The key lies in collaboration, consulting monastic authorities, acknowledging sources, and centering Tibetan voices rather than speaking over them. For example, the documentary Guardians of the Threshold worked closely with Bhutanese lamas to frame hell portal lore as a philosophical exploration of human limits, not a paranormal spectacle. The result wasn't dilution but amplification, with monks themselves explaining why these myths matter beyond their shock value. Preservation is another critical angle. With Tibet's cultural heritage under constant threat from political repression to climate change, documenting these narratives can be an act of defiance. A vanishing oral tradition can't protect anyone, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Researchers at the Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center have spent decades digitizing scriptures, but their work always begins with blessings from lineage holders. Compare that to urban explorers who sneak into sealed caves for YouTube clicks, treating sacred sites like abandoned theme parks. The difference isn't just respect, it's recognizing that some knowledge carries obligations. At its heart, this dilemma mirrors the very warnings embedded in hell portal myths themselves. Boundaries exist for a reason. Crossing them carelessly doesn't just distort the tradition, it risks awakening real-world consequences. Appropriation isn't just about who gets to tell a story, it's about who bears the weight of its truths. As one Karma Kagyu teacher put it, you wouldn't mock a poison label while drinking from the bottle. So why treat our warnings any differently? The challenge for creators and audiences alike is to engage with these stories not as consumers, but as guests listening first, then stepping lightly, if at all. Before you pack your bags and grab a flashlight for some Himalayan hell portal tourism, let's get one thing straight: Tibet isn't just another destination for dark tourism. Sure, the idea of stumbling upon a cursed cave or a whispering crevice might sound like the ultimate adventure, but reality's a lot less Indiana Jones and a lot more Interpol interrogation. First off, many of these sites aren't just spiritually off-limits, they're legally protected. Tibet's sacred landscapes are often restricted areas, and poking around without permits won't just anger the locals. It'll land you in hot water with authorities faster than you can say karmic backlash. There's a reason those prayer flags aren't just decorations, they're basically cosmic, no trespassing signs. And let's talk spiritual repercussions, because the lamas aren't joking when they say curiosity cracks more than just the ground. There's the case of a French backpacker in 2014 who ignored warnings and camped near a sealed cave in the Dolpo region. By dawn, his tent was shredded from the inside, his journal filled with frantic sketches of a door he swore was forming in the cliff face. When monks found him, he was feverishly digging at solid rock, his fingernails split down to the quick. He wasn't arrested, he was blessed in a 5-hour exorcism that left him unable to speak Tibetan despite never having learned it. Even if you dodge the supernatural, the cultural disrespect is a surefire way to turn your trip into a nightmare. Imagine explaining to a village elder that you're there to check out the local Helmuth like it's some roadside attraction. These sites aren't relics, they're actively revered, and treating them like creepypasta fodder isn't just rude, It's inviting the kind of bad luck that makes lost luggage seem quaint. Tour guides whisper about visitors who stole souvenir rocks from guarded caves, only to mail them back months later with desperate notes about night terrors and impossible shadows in their apartments. So unless you're keen on swapping your return ticket for a one-way trip into a cautionary tale, maybe stick to the scenic hikes and butter tea. Remember, in Tibet, some doors stay closed for a reason, and the ones that aren't, well, they're usually already occupied. In the remote valleys of Amdo, old herders still speak of a winter night when the sky itself seemed to tear open. An elder named Dorje recalls tending his yaks near a glacial pass when the animals suddenly panicked, their eyes rolling white as they huddled together, trembling. Then came the sound, not wind, but something like a throat clearing beneath the ice. The ground vibrated with deep, irregular pulses as if the mountain were swallowing its own heartbeat. Dorje swears he saw a jagged black seam split the snowfield ahead, exhaling air so cold it burned his lungs. By dawn, the fissure had sealed, leaving only a circle of dead grass in perfect spiral patterns, a mark locals call the devil's fingerprint. To this day, no vegetation grows there, and yaks refuse to cross that invisible line, their hides prickling with unexplained frost even in midsummer. Further west, near the ruins of Gyuj Kingdom, a village grandmother named Yongchen tells a different tale. She was a child when a traveling monk collapsed at her family's doorstep, his robes stiff with frozen black mucus. With his last breath, he gasped about a cave where shadows stood up like men, and a chanting voice had lured him deeper until his torchlight bent backward. When villagers investigated, they found the cave entrance sealed with an iron plate older than the kingdom itself, its surface etched with serpentine symbols that made their eyes water to view. The monk's body was buried under a cairn of stones, but weeks later, children playing near the site reported seeing a figure matching his description digging at the grave with bare hands, except his shadow stretched the wrong way, clinging to the afternoon sun like tar. Then there's Tashi, a former salt trader who swears he stumbled upon a portal disguised as ordinary landscape. Crossing the Changtang Plateau one autumn, he took shelter in what he thought was a shallow cave. At midnight, the walls began sweating a viscous substance that smelled like burnt hair. His butter lamp flickered not from wind, but from something breathing just beyond the light's edge. The next morning, he woke miles from the cave, his boots filled with black sand no geologist could identify. Months later, nomads found his abandoned supplies neatly arranged at the cave's mouth, down to his untouched tea bowl, still warm to the touch. Most chilling are the accounts that defy categorization. A schoolteacher in Kham once described a student who returned from a solo hike speaking flawless classical Tibetan, a language the boy had never studied. His sentences unraveled into nonsense after sunset, replaced by guttural chanting that made household dogs howl in unison. Monks who examined him claimed his shadow lacked a head, until one evening it grew an extra pair of arms during evening prayers. The boy recovered after weeks of purification rites, but his family later moved away, leaving behind a locked trunk that periodically emits muffled knocks, like someone tapping from the inside of a far deeper box. These stories share unsettling patterns, unhealed land, inverted shadows, substances that defy physics. But what chills most isn't the phenomena, it's the aftermath. Those touched by portal encounters rarely speak of them unprompted. When they do, their voices drop to whispers, as if fearing the very words might thin the veil again. As one old nun in Lhasa put it, hell doesn't need doors when curiosity builds them. In Tibetan dream yoga, the line between sleep and waking life isn't just blurred, it's a battleground. Here, hell portals don't manifest as physical cracks in the earth, but as fissures in the fabric of consciousness itself. The Milam practices Tibet's ancient art of lucid dreaming, teach that nightmares are more than just random neurons firing. They're potential weak spots where the hungry ghosts of our own subconscious can seep through. A master dream yogi doesn't just navigate these realms, they patrol them, recognizing that the mind's darkest corners are where reality seems fray first. Take the case of a 19th century meditator documented in the Dream Yogis of the Snowland. After weeks of intense retreat, he began dreaming of a corridor lined with doors, each emitting a different torment, blazing heat behind one, the sound of teeth grinding behind another. His Lama identified this as a Nyalwa Korwa, a karmic loop, where unresolved traumas risked crystallizing into a full-fledged hell portal within his psyche. The remedy wasn't avoidance but confrontation. Night after night, the yogi trained to consciously enter the corridor, not to open the doors, but to inscribe mantras on their surfaces until the visions dissolved. The practice reveals a core truth. In dream yoga, hell portals are psychological pressure valves, failures to process guilt, grief, or rage that fester until they threaten to erupt. But there's a twist. Some teachings suggest these dream portals aren't purely internal. The Bardo Thodol warns of Nelak Jayu, or shared dream mirages, where multiple practitioners experience identical nightmare landscapes, a sign their collective karma has thinned the veil too far. A 20th century account from a Bhutanese monastery describes 6 monks simultaneously dreaming of a cavern where their deceased teacher stood chained, begging them to break a silver lock. When they described the lock's markings to their abbot, he recognized it as a dutsi, a sacred seal from a nearby cave system. Investigation revealed the actual cave's entrance had been disturbed by landslides, its protective rituals interrupted. The message was clear. The dream wasn't symbolic, it was an alarm. Dream yoga's most radical idea: hell portals aren't just hazards, they're diagnostics. The Narrow Churdrug, a 16th century manual, compares them to fever dreams, uncomfortable but revealing the body's hidden imbalances. A practitioner plagued by visions of suffocation might need to address repressed grief. Recurring dreams of falling through endless space could signal an unhealthy detachment from worldly responsibilities. The portals don't just trap, they mirror, forcing the dreamer to confront what they've refused to acknowledge while awake. One modern lama in Nepal puts it bluntly: if you dream of demons every night, don't blame the demons. Ask what in you keeps inviting them to dinner. Yet the greatest risk lies in mistaking these visions for mere metaphor. Tibetan texts emphasize that the mind's fabric and reality's fabric are woven from the same thread. A nightmare portal left unchecked doesn't just haunt your sleep, it leaks. There are accounts of dream yogis who awoke to find their bodies bearing marks from dream battles, or rooms chilled by the residue of nocturnal encounters. The Terma of the Whispering Sage recounts how a hermit's recurring dream of a black vortex above his bed coincided with his village livestock vanishing until he performed a ritual to close the dream's shadow. Afterward, the vortex vanished from his sleep and the animals stopped disappearing. This interplay between dream and waking worlds reaches its peak in Turgal visions, advanced practices where meditators perceive reality itself as a kind of collective dream. Here, hell portals aren't confined to caves or nightmares, they're anywhere consciousness falters. A drunken brawl, a corporate boardroom steeped in greed, a social media feed stoking endless outrage, all become potential weak points where the Naraka realms peer through. The difference between a yogi and an ordinary person: the yogi knows they're dreaming while it happens, and instead of running or fighting, they do the one thing hell can't withstand. They shine awareness into the crack until it seals itself. Dream yoga's ultimate lesson is as unsettling as it is liberating. The worst hell portals aren't out there in the mountains. They're the doors we've spent lifetimes building inside ourselves, and the only way to dismantle them is to stop pretending we're not the ones holding the keys. What makes the warning against hell portals so enduring isn't just the supernatural terror. It's how deeply it mirrors humanity's oldest dilemma, the tension between curiosity and consequence. Tibetan law doesn't merely describe physical thresholds. It holds up a mirror to our collective psyche, reflecting the dangers of seeking answers we're not prepared to face. Think of Icarus soaring too close to the sun, or Pandora's box cracking open. These aren't just myths. They're cultural echoes of the same truth whispered in Himalayan caves. Some doors, once opened, change not just the opener but the world itself. This isn't about fear-mongering. It's about recognizing that knowledge, like fire, can warm or consume depending on how it's handled. The tale of Tsultrim Dorje, the monk who drilled into a mountain's heart, isn't just a cautionary story about arrogance. It's a metaphor for modern dilemmas: gene editing, artificial intelligence, even venturing into the deep sea or outer space. Every era has its forbidden thresholds, its own version of a hell portal promising power at a price we might only understand too late. Tibetan texts frame this as a karmic law. The more force you use to pry open a mystery, the more violently it snaps back. But the law goes deeper than simple warnings. It questions the very nature of exploration. Why do we assume every secret is meant to be uncovered? Western thought often glorifies discovery as an inherent good. Think light of knowledge metaphors. Tibetan Buddhism offers a radical counterpoint. Wisdom isn't just about seeing more, it's about knowing when to look away. The guardians of these portals, wrathful deities like Mahakala, aren't just bouncers at reality's nightclub. They embody a profound ethical principle. Boundaries aren't limitations, but the architecture that keeps existence intact. Consider how this plays out in modern science. Quantum physicists debate whether observing a particle fundamentally alters it, while neuroscientists grapple with how measurement changes the brain. Tibetan portal law predates these theories by centuries, but it arrives at a similar conclusion. Interaction isn't neutral. Every act of observation, every probe into the unknown leaves a mark. The difference: science seeks to minimize this disturbance, while Tibetan tradition asks a harder question. What if some disturbances aren't worth risking at all? The most chilling parallel lies in the concept of unintended consequences. The Bardo Thodol describes hell portals as contagions once activated. Their effects ripple unpredictably. This isn't so different from today's debates over social media algorithms or climate engineering. We're brilliant at prying open boxes, less so at controlling what escapes them. A 15th century scroll from Gyantse Monastery tells of a portal whose corruption spread through dreams, infecting minds miles away. Substitute dreams for digital networks, and the analogy becomes uncomfortably clear. Yet the law isn't fatalistic. It acknowledges curiosity as a double-edged sword. The same impulse that might lead someone to chant forbidden mantras at a cave mouth also drives medical breakthroughs and artistic masterpieces. Tibetan Buddhism's genius lies in its nuance. It doesn't reject exploration, but tempers it with Lekki Drima. The awareness of karmic stains. The rituals to seal hell portals aren't about ignorance, they're about humility. Before meditators approach dangerous thresholds, they spend years mastering compassion practices. The message isn't "don't look," it's "learn how to see without breaking what you behold." This duality reaches its peak in the concept of Shizrab, discriminating wisdom. Unlike Western binaries that pit knowledge against ignorance, Tibetan thought recognizes a third path, knowing what to pursue and what to leave veiled. It's the difference between a surgeon's scalpel and a grave robber's shovel. Both cut deep, but only one respects the sanctity of what lies beneath. Perhaps that's why these stories haunt us. They don't just warn of supernatural peril, they challenge the modern cult of unlimited access. In an age where everything from DNA to ancient burial sites is treated as data to be mined, the hell portal myths ask uncomfortable questions. When does discovery become violation? How much should we know? And most crucially, who bears the cost when the answer is too much? The next time you hear about a sealed cave or a forbidden text, consider this. The real horror might not be what's kept hidden, but what we unleash by demanding it be seen. The idea of hell portals often gets lumped in with generic ghost stories or haunted places, but the truth is far stranger and more specific. These aren't just spots where spirits linger, they're cosmic weak points where the rules of reality warp under the weight of karmic imbalance. Take the typical ghost story, a shadowy figure in an old house, cold spots, maybe a whisper or two. Those are echoes, remnants of the past. Hell portals, by contrast, are active wounds, places where the membrane between realms isn't just thin, it's actively fraying. While ghosts might rattle chains, a portal's presence distorts time, matter, even perception itself. Another common mix-up, treating these thresholds like dungeon doors in a fantasy game, something you can just walk through and back from if you're brave enough. Tibetan texts couldn't be clearer. There's no adventure to be had here. Unlike the underworld gates of Greek myth or the haunted forests of Slavic folklore, hell portals aren't neutral passages. They're karmic snares, amplifying the flaws of those who disturb them. A ghost might scare you, a portal reshapes you. There's a reason accounts describe monks emerging from encounters with aged hands on childlike arms or speaking languages they've never learned. These aren't hauntings. They're reality itself unraveling. Perhaps the biggest misconception is treating hell portals as relics of superstition, divorced from real spirituality. Modern dismissals often frame them as primitive attempts to explain caves or seismic activity, but Tibetan cosmology sees them as part of an intricate ecosystem, as real as a river or a mountain. Just because we lack the instruments to measure their effects doesn't mean they're mere metaphors. Consider how quantum physics now acknowledges phenomena that defy classical logic, particles existing in two places at once, time bending near black holes. Tibetan portal lore operates on a similar premise. Some truths are counterintuitive, but that doesn't make them fiction. The takeaway: these aren't campfire tales. They're precision warnings, encoded in myth but rooted in a profound understanding of cause and effect. The next time you hear about a cursed cave or a weeping statue, ask yourself, is this a story about the dead or a lesson about the living? After centuries of whispered warnings and meticulously guarded rituals, one truth echoes through Tibetan teachings. Hell portals aren't just dangers, they're inevitabilities waiting for the right cocktail of arrogance and ignorance to unleash them. The lore's relentless caution stems from a chilling understanding. These thresholds don't just lead to suffering, they feed on it, growing stronger with every soul foolish enough to pry them open. Consider the meticulous defenses, the iron chains forged from meteorites, the mantra-inscribed stones, the guardians like Mahakala who test intruders with riddles of compassion. These aren't overreactions, they're the spiritual equivalent of nuclear containment protocols, crafted by masters who understood the fallout wouldn't just poison a person, but the very fabric of their community, their lineage, even the land itself. At its core, this isn't about superstition, it's about accountability. Tibetan Buddhism frames reality as a tapestry woven from countless threads of karma, where every tug sends vibrations across the whole. Hell portals represent the ultimate karmic debt. The moment someone's unchecked curiosity or hunger for power tears a hole others must spend generations stitching shut. The stories of villages erased from history, of monks fused to cave walls, aren't just horror tropes, they're object lessons in interconnectivity. When the Bardo Thodol warns that the arrogant practitioner mistakes the abyss for a shortcut, it's highlighting a universal failing, our tendency to assume consequences only apply to us. Yet beneath the dire warnings lies a profound optimism. The rituals to seal these portals, the chanting, the offerings, the wrathful deities standing watch aren't just about fear. They're testaments to humanity's capacity for collective care. Every prayer flag fluttering on a remote ridge, every gauntlet of mantra-charged stones whispers the same truth: we're not powerless against the darkness. But our power lies in restraint, in respecting boundaries older than civilization itself. So here's the question that lingers long after the stories fade. If you stood before a fissure veined with black mist, hummed promises of forbidden knowledge, would you risk opening it? Or would you become another link in the chain holding it shut? For more myths that walk the razor's edge between wonder and warning, hit subscribe. And remember, some doors stay closed for a reason.